It's fascinating to me looking at the bigger picture, what this whole COVID situation has brought out in society in general. That, people are often stridently pro or anti-vax, or people have an attitude about wearing masks, or whatever it might be, lockdowns, anti-lockdowns, and loss of freedoms and government tracking. And isn't it fascinating how many themes have emerged and how strongly people have opinions on this stuff?
Well, it's funny you say that. So, this oneness section within the Joshua teachings, I thought has sort of been a tipping point for me, and really, I think it dovetails nicely into what you just said. And what I've realized too is that there are billions of different scenarios going on. There are 7 billion people, on the planet, right? And every single person sees the world differently. So we all think we're living in this one reality, whatever you want to call one experience, but we're not. I mean, absolutely not. My wife and I went for a walk with the dog. She experienced. I said to her, let's walk, and I want you to. We do a 45-minute walk. Let's not talk. And when we get back, I want you to tell me what your experience was. We were 3 inches from each other. We didn't have one thing in common. Not one thing in common.
Wow.
Right. She was, while I was on the phone, I was texting, CJ was, and I was like, did you see the houses with the new, everyone's got their lawn in Arizona, they all call it winter grass, and everybody's trees are trimmed. Like we all experience what we're feeling. And it really kind of blew me away last week's, I really wanted to talk to you last week too. And I had to travel and I was like, but this idea that, you're basically unlocking your reality by you're a tuning fork, right? You're a vibrational match. And every moment of every day, you're unlocking that perspective, right? So if you want to take a step back, and I want to say, it's a different reality, but how you feel is literally a tuning fork on unlocking your perspective every moment of every day. And whatever you're feeling, like I said, I was in New York on 9/11. I have one of my very good friends says didn't happen. I just laugh. I'm like, okay. I was at the dinner with people. I spent a whole day with people down in Tucson, Arizona. And we were just talking, have a great time. And I had said something at the end, and someone said something. I'm like, Fauci, he should be in jail. If I was a CEO of a company that changed my mind that many times, I would have been fired or let go. I'm like, you got to go one strategy. And they were like, if you would have said that earlier, we wouldn't have had the same experience today. And I was like, oh, okay. I just didn't, I'm like, if you let, so once again, these are people unlocking their own realities. They're not mine, their own perspectives. My perspective is everybody's great. Everybody can say what they want. I could joke and say, I don't agree or disagree and whatever, who cares? I'm not making any laws. Just like it is what it is. Yeah. But people are, to your point, they are putting a flag in the ground and saying, if you don't believe this, we can't be friends. And that's tolerance. That we came down here to experience tolerance, to experience all these different, and go, okay, that's your perspective. Cool. You go, I said to my wife, you go on your journey and tell me what, so it's a microcosm of what we experience. You go to a business meeting. The reason why you do a recap is because if there's 6 people in a business, all 6 have a different perspective.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I just made an appointment with my Reiki healer, and I said, I want to do a tuning fork. She does a tuning fork Reiki healing session. I want you to teach me, because I'm like, I journaled like a couple of pages today just on like, oh my God, like I realized that my perspective, what I want, my desire is there. I'm not correctly tuned to open that perspective, to open that situation for me. I'm still opening the one over here because this is what I believe, right? And like, so when I was meditating today and I was sitting back, I was thinking completely about the perspective that I was looking forward to. And I was there and I was enjoying it. And I was like, wow, how do I have to feel to experience that? And for me, I'm loving this oneness, because this is all what, the teachings and last week's, I think, assignment, right? Which I found like wildly, like honestly, it blew my mind. And I don't know if you did it, or we talked about it, where it was like you had to take the relationship assignment. It was take a relationship with someone, either your mom, your wife, right, or your kid or something, and then you had to describe it, like describe the relationship as as you see yourself separate from that person, and then why did you attract that person into your life? And it changed. Like I was this weekend, I was in Santa Barbara, in Arizona. Nobody's wearing masks. I like I said, I respect people. If people want me to wear a mask, of course. Like I don't really have a view on it. I don't care. But if you want me to wear a mask, I will. I want you to feel safe. There, and everybody's there, and I like in the hotel, everyone's wearing. I'm like, oh yeah. I had to go out. I had to run to the C store, buy them. I don't even have them anymore here. But I'm like, I didn't care. And I'm like, this is, once again, why am I having these relationships? Why am I meeting? Why are you and I friends right now, Rob? What am I to you, and what are you to me? Right? Based upon this stuff, the teaching is the conversation that we had with this oneness. This is what it's all about. Like you and I, if we are to believe what Joshua says, that we're going to go back up when we both die, and we're going to be giggling at each other, going, "That was so funny what you were doing." Right? But we're here for a reason, for each other, right? You are here for me, and I am here for you. What aspect of your life am I showing you, and what aspect of my life are you showing me? Like when you start asking that question, when I finally realized, when I did a session with a manifestation event with, you'll die laughing at this one, with Jessica, right? About my whole money thing, right? And I needed to have an education. I needed to have other people. And then she started realizing, okay, well, when you went through your tough times, I said, well, really, my wife was making the money. It's like, okay, does your wife have an Ivy League education? I'm like, yeah. Does your wife have a pedigree? I'm like, yeah. She's laughing, going, oh my God. Your wife, the aspect of your wife is everything that you believe you need to be successful.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was like, she listed it. And I'm like, she goes, you just listed all these 10 things. And you just told me your wife saw all these 10 things. And I'm like, oh, so this whole thing about what aspect, right, we are for each other is so interesting to me. Like I was thinking about the call today. I'm like, what is Rob to me? Like, what is he showing me? And I'm loving the question and the contemplation. And for me, you are, I think, somebody who's opening my eyes to possibilities that someone who is successful, someone who did follow the rules, then decided that those rules didn't suit him anymore, and decided to go out on his own path, that's okay. Like, you're not going to get in trouble. You're not going to be squashed, by those different things. And it's okay to want nice things, but not to depend upon them.
Yeah. They don't define you. Yeah. You raise a lot of really interesting things in there, topics. One of them is that, and Joshua talks about this quite a lot, people's need to seek or find agreement. That a lot of discussion, jokes, humor, irony, whatever, is about people directly or indirectly trying to get someone else to endorse their point of view. That seems to matter to a lot of people. And when you let go of that, it's very liberating, isn't it? That you're not seeking agreement anymore, knowing that everyone has a different viewpoint.
Right. It's for me, it's interesting. This worksheet last week, when you change the question, and I love what Tony Robbins, you and I have both we talk right about how we've been through this whole right progression, right, where we got up to Joshua. But Tony Robbins always says, right, you change the question, the quality of your question determines the quality of your life. And the idea of asking that question, forget about for the moment agreeing with what you think, agreeing with what I think, but asking the question, like, what aspect, if we're all one and you're just an aspect of me, what aspect of me are you? Like, and I started asking this whole weekend. I was around all these different people, right? And I was just, and people are like, what is?
Oops, you froze there.
I just kept saying, okay, this person to show me X. This person is here to show me Y. And then you kind of get you kind of thinking that the coffee maker's there to have what aspect of me. This last week's exercise has still got me state where I'm taking a very different look at life. In not from, and I did spend a lot of time, you and I talked about this, right? Why, how dare them question me, right? We went through a whole, right? Right. We did that. And now it's like, well, okay, well, wait a minute. Like, what aspect of my life are they showing me? And it it immediately diffuses. Like, I'm You're okay now. I see you now.
Yeah, no, my internet died momentarily there. I missed some of that. But I heard you talking about the idea that other people are an aspect of you, and being at a business meeting and there was all these divergent opinions. And if you do contemplate the idea that everyone else is an aspect of you, or that we're all an aspect of source, or the oneness thing, then suddenly somebody who's got a different idea, and especially a very different idea about something to you, suddenly it's not a matter of judging them or criticizing them. It's actually more a matter of trying to understand their point of view, and or just simply accepting them.
It's like, I had never thought of that. Like, we've all heard, right, this, life reflects it's taken this whole idea of this mirror concept, right? That, let's just say your perspective or your reality, whatever the correct term is, right, is a reflection back to you of what you're, right, either thinking, feeling, believing, correct terminology, right? And this takes it a whole different level, where it forget for the moment that it's a reflection back to you, and change that and say, that is you. Who is that? Why is that person you? And what are they trying to show you about yourself? And like, I have spent years coaching on sidelines, years. This weekend, we were at a tournament. And I told the other guys, I'm like, you guys handle it. I went down and I was like, I had urges to, and I'm like, I'm no longer, like, you coach during practice, I'm no longer screaming at the kids. And, you do this, I'm like, I'm just down here having, like, wow. And I'm like, and I see something I would have done differently. And I'm like, what? I'm like, yeah, that's just I'm like, what a different, even my kid came over to me and was like, Dad, you okay this weekend? I'm like, yeah, why? She's like, and she said to me, like, oh, I loved it. You were so calm. You were just there. You were just enjoying it. And I'm like, yeah, I really was. And I had people, by the way, I had people telling me, like, oh, you're unvaccinated, so we can't see you. And I'm like, okay, sorry. Hey, listen, I've had COVID, so I have antibodies. So I understand. And I apologize if I offended you. And I was just like, holy, very much like, okay, well, what was that trying to show me? Like, oh, my fears, all my fears. I can't do this because of that. You can't listen to someone because they don't agree with you. You can't appreciate somebody because they don't have the same beliefs as you do. And I'm like, wait a minute, you can appreciate everybody.
That's a good place to get to that point where,
I don't know if I'm there. I was there this weekend. I don't know if I'm there right now.
But you know it exists, right? And you know what it feels like when you are there.
By the way, that you just said something that is like so brilliant. It's possible. Staying in that place is a whole different, that's a whole, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's like the Jim on the call, and he's like, I've done it. I'm there. And I'm like, after 4 calls, and I start laughing. I'm like, you're there at the moment. You're gonna have another event. Like we all do, right?
Yeah.
But you just said it so beautifully. And that honestly is something you should write about, because you talk about it so well and so eloquently. We all reach that moment, right, where we feel something and we realize something, but then we go back and right to our lives, but how do we get back?
Right. So essentially that's also about being in alignment, isn't it? That when you're in alignment because you feel strong positive emotions, and you know when you're out of alignment because your emotional guidance system delivers you a very strong negative feeling. So and we understand that concept, and we know about being in alignment, but we still wobble in and out from time to time during the day. But what happens over time is you wobble out less often, and you become more acutely aware, like you feel things more intensely. So the signals are much stronger, and you react a lot faster and think, oh no, I'm not going to wobble out of alignment here. Like minor things, like when somebody does something really stupid on the road in front of you, cuts in front of you, or doesn't indicate, and whatever it might be, stuff that I'd be normally saying, that's so and so, blah blah. And then you're with somebody else in the car, and they said, "Did you see that person? I can't believe it." And whereas these days I'm just like, whatever. It didn't affect me. I saw it. It was interesting, but it didn't hit my car. It didn't injure me. Who cares? Like stuff like that happens. It's just you don't want to take it to the next stage and get hit by getting too intensely into that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's funny. So we all have this conversation on alignment, right? Hey, how do I get to alignment? What we don't talk about is that staying in alignment 24/7 isn't what we're here for. Like, that's not a possibility. We're going to fall out. Like, we're here to experience these fears, realize that they're fears, and then come back to align. Like the back and forth is actually part of the process.
Right. Very good point you make, that because when you take a step and do something, and so you do that thing, and then you're ready for the next step, right? So the inspiration arrives, the next idea comes in, and if you're open to it, you receive that idea, and you may feel fear around that idea, and you work out that the fear is irrational. You overcome the fear, you push past it, and you take the step. And if you weren't doing that, then you're not going anywhere. That's a good point you make, that recognizing the next fear and taking that next step is part of the process, and therefore you are going to have some wobbles at those moments. But it's interesting. I like the way Joshua says that when you identify a fear and overcome it, my words, not theirs, it adds to the collective consciousness, or to all that is, that it's kind of like the whole world benefits from taking that positive step. And if that sounds crazy to people listening to this, well, if you think about it, if you look at the progress of humans in recent times, how we went from hunter-gatherers with short lives and dependent on killing the wild beasts really to live, finding fruit in season, or some, bitter lettuce leaves or plants to eat. Like, it must have been a very harsh existence. And those people contemplated an existence where they weren't living that way. And so therefore we invented horticulture and then agriculture, so we could stay in one place and grow crops and raise animals. And then if you look at where we went from there, like my grandfather, who's no longer with us, he was born in 1901, pretty much before there was any flight, right? And then when he was maybe in his 80s or something, he flew business class from England to New Zealand and back again. And I thought, what changes you've seen? And then since he's gone, the changes have just gone faster and faster and faster and faster. And things like the mobile phone and Spotify, and all of those streaming services and things you take for granted, that clearly we're on an ascending path, right? So it is really an evolution that's happening, I think.
No, and so we like to identify that, and I think the way you just described that is brilliant, and I absolutely concur. Where, like, you think about this, it's like, I mean, you remember, the history books. If you were a French speaking on English soil, you could be killed. Then it was that first person to embrace a French speaking person, and then that became acceptable. It was the first African American, right, to do something that became acceptable. The first woman to do something became. So all of these people, when Joshua says we accept something, when we get the higher level, it changes the whole world. And you can identify those small moments that we just spoke about. But like for me, for someone to come, like, for example, I'm this weekend, like, I choose to take on somebody, right, because for whatever stupid, right, I don't even know, a disagreement, right? Now and I'm with 8 people. Now those 8 people and those other 8, right? There's versus me start. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. You're 100% right. We come back. Let me buy you a drink, and I'll come back, right? And everyone's laughing and giggling, right? So for me to take that higher perspective versus 2 weeks ago, I would have been like, or even 3 weeks ago, I would have been like, hey, I'm living my life. You live your life, right? But and I was like, whoa, what is this person? This is me. Like, what are they trying to show me? What a different way to approach the situation. A whole different, like for me, like even like people around me were asking, like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, this is so weird. And I can't, I talked to my daughter, my 18-year-old daughter about it. And I sent her last week's worksheet. I tried to talk to either, my wife and it's just, people look at you like, what? I'm like, and I know at this point to stop, right? Don't go too further, because then now you're defending and trying to sell versus just being natural.
Yeah.
Right. You and I talked about that a lot. Like, at times we want to sell, like no, if it's not natural, if they haven't asked for it, right?
People also absorb stuff kind of by osmosis, though, I think I've found. You're talking about once an idea is in the collective consciousness or whatever. I mean, Wayne Dyer used to write about it, and he called it an idea whose time has come. And people often quote when Roger Bannister ran the 4-minute mile. Nobody had run it, but as soon as he did, a lot of people could do it. And I went to this exhibition at the museum in the weekend. It was about Galileo, the Italian astronomer and scientist, and from like 500-600 years ago, who's always been a great hero of mine. I've been to his tomb in the Santa Croce in Florence.
Wow, that's awesome.
In Firenze. Anyway, so it was Copernicus, the Dutchman, who observed that actually the Earth is not the center of the universe or the solar system. The sun is, and we go around. The Earth rotates around the sun. So Copernicus suggested that idea. Galileo observed and realized this was true and got into trouble with the church, and ended up, eventually in the house arrest, because that was heresy to say that the Earth was not the center of the solar system. But that wasn't the main thing I want to say about Galileo. What happened was the word got out that the Dutch, and obviously the Dutch were doing a lot of interesting things at the time, and a lot of it was about military technology, and Copernicus being a Dutchman. So another thing they invented, the word somehow got out that they'd had this top secret invention in the Netherlands, and it was essentially a telescope, right? It was a tube that you could look through that made things seem a lot closer, and it had a military purpose, which is why it was top secret. So Galileo got word of the existence of this idea, this thing, this tube that made things seem closer. And once he knew it existed, he sat down, he thought, right, how would I make such a thing? How would it work? What would be involved? And then so he invented the telescope at that point, because he knew that it was possible, right? So once he knew it existed, once he knew it was possible, he was right. Oh, okay, if that's possible, then it must work like this. But on top of that, Galileo, in my speak, not his, channeled endless, incredible ideas. And he had some amazing quotes. I photographed them, they were so good. One of them was something like, the gist of it was that when you make a great discovery, once you've made it, it becomes obvious. And because I've been walking around saying to Trace, these things, once he discovered them, like they're really obvious, but nobody thought of them before that. So he said, these things are obvious once you discover them, but the trick is to discover them in the first place, to be the first person to think it. So there's many reasons I like Galileo, marvel at his, it was a great exhibition. I might go back again.
That's awesome. And when you think about the idea that, and this is also sort of tying into this oneness concept, that we're actually not creating anything, that it already all exists.
Yes, you mentioned that earlier. That is a really key point. You mentioned that earlier. I'm glad you've come back to that. So say some more about that.
And it almost fits exactly with what you're saying with Galileo, right? Because what he's saying is it's so obvious and simple, meaning it's there. We just need to connect to it, right?
Yeah.
Tune into it.
Yeah, the 4-minute mile was always there, right?
Yeah, so it's almost a great story if you look at the Galileo aspect, is that it does show you that it's always been there. It's always there.
Yeah.
Either you see it or you don't. Think about, and I think it was, I think it was one of the Gary or somebody that talked about, in World War II, Joshua, I think, right? The mothers that had kids are over in Europe, and every day they wake up, they believe that they were alive or whatever, and then they realize they got a note 6 months ago your child had been killed in the war. You're like, but their percent with every single bit. No, it's so, to me, it's so interesting about how your perception unfolds.
Yeah. So that was a very interesting thing. That was in the context of death. And I think it was when Jessica asked Joshua about, because Jessica's working on a whole concept of a new approach to death. And that was the idea that, yes, I understand the person is still there and I can communicate them by thought with them by thought or meditation or whatever, but how do I deal with the obvious loss of the physical presence of that person? That was where that came out. So the other thing you mentioned is the concept that everything already exists in what some people call the field of potentiality. And I think Deepak Chopra might have used that term, which I always liked. And so you bring something to you by becoming a vibrational match to that thing. And that's because we all think that we achieve things by effort and struggle, but another way to look at it is, well, when you become a vibrational match, things come to you. And if you look at, most people know somebody who's super successful in some field or other, whether it's sport, acting, music, business and money, whatever. And if you think of somebody who seems to do incredibly well, some people just, everything they do turns out brilliantly, and they just have success after success. And you see some people for whom that's true. They're just constantly on a roll throughout their entire lives. And then you see some people who are the opposite. So there's no rational explanation for that, really, as to how some people manage to constantly attract the things they want in their lives, and other people constantly attract things they seem to not want.
And we refer to them as what? As lucky, right? I mean, what do we?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Lucky,
you're 100% right.
Yeah.
It's and then the ones that don't, we're like, oh, you're just unlucky, right? Or have bad karma. I mean, think about the terms. You're 100% right with that. Think about all the terms we create to approve that concept. When you realize this too, like I was just talking to my wife about this. I said, but if you really understand why someone's so successful, it's because they focused on one thing. They're truly successful people, focused on one thing, and that was it. That was their whole. Their energy. Everything was there, and they knew. They believed in themselves. They knew it, and they unlocked it.
Yeah. I've seen some Christian people in business who just profoundly believe that the Lord will look after them and things will turn out. And from your and my perspective, that's actually the God within, not an external, third-party Lord out there. But they managed to actually, through that particular path, get to the same point. I found some of these Galileo quotes. He said, I had never met a person so ignorant that I couldn't learn something from them. So here's one of the greatest geniuses ever who says, I can learn something from anybody.
That's brilliant.
Here's another one. You cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him find it within himself.
Yes.
How deep is that?
That sums up everything we're talking about. I mean, it's wow.
And he said, all truths are easy to understand once they have been discovered. The trick is to discover them.
Yeah, that's great. And have you ever read Neil Donald Walsh? I think he wrote the book Conversations with.
I've got that book. I could never quite get into it, to be honest.
So he's got, and it refers to something that we've talked about, because you mentioned truths, something that you've said that, I've really sort of leaned into. There is no such thing as truth. It's just limiting limiting beliefs and empowering beliefs.
Yeah.
Right. That's just it. He has the same thing. It's like, there is no truth. It's just your perspective. And it's like, when you hear somebody 1,000 years ago saying the same, you're like, I mean, it's been around. It's not this, none of this stuff is new, right? You're like, but if you look at why we went left, or why we took the left turn, and it was all based upon trying to control the illusion, right? Trying to control different aspects of it. If you just go back to center and you start asking those different questions, things become pretty, I mean, how is it that one country hates another country? How is it one religion hates another? How is that even possible?
Yeah.
I mean, you got to giggle. And be like, what?
Yeah. I mean, it is strange when religions have animosity towards each other. It's like, you guys essentially are all on the same playing field, playing for the same team. Did you not know?
And I get it's a different perspective, but to your point of once again, what Galileo just said, what can you learn from them? What can they learn from you? And then how do you even get it even? It's when we shut off our tolerance, when we shut off the ability to hear what other people say, we stopped growing as a society.
Yeah, well, that's true as well. And there are various topics in our society. There's always been some, but even now we think we have freedom of speech, but there are a lot of taboo things you can't say and places you can't go. Hey, just on that oneness thing, I guess because I got brought up, as a Catholic, so I don't go to church or any of that stuff for many, many years, but I remember stuff that I learned as a kid, at school, because I went to a Catholic school and all of that. And there's something that Jesus said that's in the Bible, and it said, the gist of it is that whatever you do to the least of them or whatever, you do unto me. So in other words, what Jesus was saying is, whatever you do to anybody, no matter how lowly you may think they are, you're doing it to me, which is to me like Jesus, channeling the oneness concept for us just 2,000 years ago.
It's like, when we first started doing every time, the last, like, I think 2 or 3 of these ones, I was like, we'll see what it's like. And I'm like, and it wasn't what I was looking for, but I'm like, let's see what it's like. The oneness one, like, I was not looking. I'm like, what is this? I'm like, but man, like, I'm loving it.
Yeah,
I really
incredible.
love it.
I'm surprised it's so early in the sequence, because it's kind of seminal, really. It's huge. It's right up there. It's quite advanced.
It's so huge. It's like I said, and the interesting part too is that, and I think I'm gonna try to ask the question to Joshua tomorrow. And you should still ask the question about the brain. I know you said, you sent me a text. You should still ask that, because I'd love to hear his perspective on it. And yes, you do. We all know that, but societies tries to tell us that we're only use a certain percentage. Right. That's not true. We all know, right? And
I googled that. I think I told you, and it turns out it's kind of a myth that many people believe. Like 2/3 of people believe we use 10% of our brain, but in fact, the census that scientists put on the brain show that we use it all. So
right. But to your point, like, but nobody's defined what we use it all for.
No, well, also we're probably doing a lot of things that we don't know about and can't measure. And so, like, if you believe you create your reality and that physical reality is energy and particles, infinitesimally small particles zipping around, whatever, and that solid matter is not really solid after all, then you could imagine there's kind of what you might call hard bed reality, to quote Seth. And then below that is, you could say, the code that, like the Matrix, the code that drives the entire system. One of the reasons I'm interested in that Carlos Castaneda stuff is that work kind of looks at the code beneath the system, like the energy that creates your physical reality. So where were we headed with that? You said something that got me.
I was going to say that for all of us, I was going to ask a question with Joshua to say, we talk about, everyone talks about alignment, right? And achieving alignment, but it's like, it's like flow, right? If you were in a sporting event, you're going to hit flow and you're going to come out. And the idea is, when you come out, you're experiencing the world as it is and not reacting, right? So alignment allows you to experience the good and the bad, and when those negative manifestation events come out, to process it properly, or not, I shouldn't say process it, to process it effectively, right? And when you're not in alignment, you react, and then you jump into that negative event, and that event becomes your reality, and you live in that reality for a period of time, right? If I'm angry at my wife, if I'm angry at my kid, it could take days, but I'm living in that reality. Now, when someone says something to me, you're fat, you're an idiot, you're stupid, you're this, and I'm like, oh, okay, okay, cool. And I'm not living in that reality. I'm not even reacting to it. I'm like, whatever. I'm like, I get it. But am I in complete alignment? Am I enjoying that? No, I'm just not reacting to it. And I ask myself, like, why do they say that to me? And I'm like, and then I process that, right? And I come out of that perspective versus step into their perspective. And I think that for me is interesting. I originally I thought, like, it's like a Buddha monk. You want to get into alignment, you never come out. Like no, it's like going underwater. Yeah, you can hold your breath initially for 10 seconds, but I want to be able to hold my breath for 5 minutes underwater. Like, how do you do that and come back up for breath? Right. And that's what I want to ask him, is that what alignment's like? Like, you're constantly in and out, but you get better at staying in. And when you come out, you want to call it a wobble, as you refer to it, as Joshua refers to it, but you process it a little bit more effectively. So it actually adds to the experience. It adds to the collective.
Yeah. And you mentioned about getting annoyed with your wife or your kid or whatever. And I'm sure you've noticed that by having done this work, that the number of those annoyances has diminished. They don't last very long, and you tend to see them for what they are. And it's incredibly liberating, because I think as you get older, you tend to get more and more of that stuff building up, and then you have more resistance and fear. And then because I look back and I thought, where's that sort of spontaneous joie de vivre that I had when I was a teenager or a young adult? And because of this work, I've rediscovered all of that and let go of all those minor annoyances. That it's a simple reframing concept, really, that is often used by psychotherapists and the like. So, we call it various other things in this kind of work, but reframing is the same thing. It's like, well, you could look at that as annoying or bad, but you could also look at it as neutral or good. And the trivial example I always use is, you're driving down the highway and the light turns red and you're in a hurry and you think, damn, I really wanted that green light still. And then you can stop and think, well, it's not going to make any difference to my day, really, and especially not to my life if I'm a minute or two later. And in the meantime, perhaps you didn't have an accident, or you saw a billboard or a sign-written car with some information that you needed at that moment, or you could actually stop and relax and center yourself and, do a couple of deep breaths. So, like, there's 101 ways you can construe that as a positive event if you want to reframe it that way. And if you live that way, I found, even if that's all you ever get out of this work we're doing, it's enormously what I call adaptive. In other words, it's about living a happy, enjoyable life.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I constantly tell myself is that I only see a little bit of the screen, right? So whatever happens, a red light, a green light, how is this for my benefit? I'm like, you only see a fraction.
Yeah.
Right? And at that moment, so if I get angry,
you don't know. Yeah.
Right. And if I get angry at that moment, once again, I now am vibrationally unlocking a perspective that's going to bring more anger to me, or more things or more challenges. I'm not even quite sure what the terminology is, but if I stay calm and I stay whatever, then I'm unlocking more and more and more of that, right? So even though you see a tiny, tiny perspective, every one of those events is bringing you closer and closer to to how you're feeling and what you're looking to unlock. So if you're rushing and rushing, and I spent 25 years in New York City, literally running from place to place to place to place, soaked, sweating. I had an extra suit, had an extra 2 extra shirts constantly in the office. And I pushed and pushed, and that's all I got back. Back.
Yeah. This is probably a cliche, but in the shopping mall yesterday, I saw this guy with a shirt, beautiful Italian blue shirt, t-shirt, and the slogan said, "I'm not shouting, I'm Italian." Which, as an Italian American, you'd probably, it's probably cliche, but it's like, oh yeah, I think of my first wife's Italian grandmother and nonno and nonna, and they would sometimes like, are they arguing? No, they're just discussing.
It's just a different perspective, right? I am so, I honestly am, this part of the course has been so interesting to me, for somebody who spent so many years trying to control outside conditions, to
Yes.
manipulate outside
Yes.
conditions,
Yes. Yeah.
right? That, to me, to say that they kept representing themselves to me to show me an aspect of myself, right? And I just kept trying to control them, manipulate them, and they kept popping up like, it's like, Groundhog Day, right? Or
Yeah.
whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
It's a
So I
never
think that's a
ending.
really important thing to like. It's a very liberating thing. Jackie Seiden, who has the Evolution Pod Club, Jackie, who we see on our calls
Mhm.
sometimes, she talks about that on her podcast about, I think basically she was saying she was just like the ace of trying to control conditions. Now, this is a very determined and clever and capable person, right? And she's got this amazing ability to get an idea, and before you can blink, she's actually implemented it. Like, she pushes past fear and she's on to the next thing, while you're still drawing breath. So she said she's liberated herself from that, trying to control conditions and blah blah blah, and I think she has. And what she's done is take that energy and apply it to, like, she started doing the Joshua work, and next thing she's got a podcast, and then she's writing a book. It's like she really puts things into action, and I guess she's managed to redirect that energy into a different place where she actually wants it and can benefit her.
Yeah, it's amazing. Did you do the exercise from last week by any chance?
No, I started doing it, and I've
Okay.
done some of it in my mind. I was looking at it just before we started talking, because you basically, there are several, maybe 3 categories of people that you,
Yes.
Yeah, I've got it right here. 3 categories of people.
Right.
The first one is like a life partner, like a mate, it says, either current or past. The second one is a parent, and the
Yes.
other one is a friend. So yeah, I looked at that before, and I thought I'm going to enjoy doing that.
I honestly, and like I said, I sent it to my 18-year-old daughter as well. The second page of that, there are some things that Joshua says in here that were very eye-opening to me. It says the definition of self is always and only created by the self. So as we look for outside, and I spent my years looking for outside validation of who and what I was. So, to be honest, the second page, the second, third, fourth, and fifth paragraphs were probably the most powerful, where it says your definition of who you perceive yourself to be creates your experiences in this reality. It does not matter what you choose, because your reality will always be a perfect reflection of your choices. Since most humans do not consciously choose their definition of self, most do not change.
So
Their
that itself,
realities.
that one sentence there is incredible, isn't it? That
Right, it's
since most
crazy.
humans do not consciously choose their definition of self, because I always sort of knew that, but I never had the words to describe it. Because when you meet someone who says, "Oh no, I'm a such and such person," like,
Yeah.
like they define themselves. "Oh no, I didn't never do that sort of thing. I always do blah blah blah." And I've met people over the years who say, "No, no, no, I'm a such and such person," and I always knew it was incredibly limiting, almost to me like, "Oh, like." touching something too hot, it's like, "Ooh, keep away from me," with that sort of attitude. And I couldn't have told you why. I just knew that it was kind of like a magnet repelling, 2 similar poles on a magnet pushing each other away. I always felt the bounce, like the pinball bounce, when people would say that stuff. It's like, "Oh, no, 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 I don't know why that's wrong, but it's just wrong."
Right. And now think about this. And now I couldn't agree more. But I fell into that illusion where, when I was a young kid, that you can't really, you're not really good at school. You can't really read or write. So I remember all the way up through, I mean, my first job, I'm not a good writer. I'm not a good reader. Do you have somebody I can work with? That story, I defined myself by somebody else's story
Yeah.
for almost 25 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we do here. I'm a loud New York Italian guy. I mean, I remember saying that for years. I'm like, no, and now I'm just like, hey, I'm a passionate guy that loves life, and I want to engage and experience everything.
Yeah. And sometimes I express my energy, and that's because I choose to.
Yeah,
Not
whatever
because
it may
of
be.
where I was brought up.
Right?
Yeah.
Or I'm Republican, I'm Democrat, I'm pro this, I'm anti that. Think about how we let everybody else decide how we're going to define ourselves. When
Yeah.
most people probably would accept the freedoms, right? Let everybody be free to do what they want to do. Like, okay, as long as we're not hurting people, right? I mean, as long as it's good, as long as it's for your highest good and for the highest good of all, right? If those terms come in, but we don't, like we do. And if our parents, if our parents are a certain religion and we're a certain religion, if our parents believe a certain thing, then we believe a certain thing. And I'm like, well, and people, oh, it's in your DNA. I'm like, no, it's what? Like that sentence right there crushes all of those things.
Yeah.
I mean, every single one of them. To me, this, and then on the third paragraph too, if a person fundamentally believes that their feelings are dictated by what happens in their outside world, they will live as a victim of those conditions forever.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, you're like, I lived my whole life that way.
Who didn't?
Right?
Yeah.
You're like, holy cow, wait a minute. Weren't we supposed to wait for something to happen out there and then we could react to it? Like that to me. And then if you say, and then, if you really want to get into the hokey pokey, right? Well, I'm not manifesting a brand new car. And you start saying, well, that car already exists as we know. The money exists as we know. The ideas exist as we just discussed. And you change that dialogue to be, how do you become a vibrational match with it? You take a course like this. I talk with someone like you. These things bring you into vibrational match with what you're looking for. And then you come into contact with those things, right? That's a much simpler way where people go, okay, it's no different than you defined most by the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not an idea that is outrageous and people haven't thought about. It is absolutely been there, but it's been clouded in the illusion of, once again, I didn't go to I can't hang out with them. I don't have an Ivy League education. That's not my crew, right? I wasn't born with a blue chip last name, right? I don't have that. So once again, then you define yourself in a box versus just going over there and having that conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah, like the oneness for me was a very eye-opening experience in terms of how to perceive everything around me. And I've been really, really enjoying it.
It's very deep. It is rich. And
it even has my perfect example in here. It says, the perception of self, I am not smart, creates a definition of self. And obviously this leads to a higher limited physical experience compared to the definition, I am smart. Like that was like I felt like it was like, oh my God, that was given to me. I was like, holy cow. I always felt I needed, well, you're not the smartest guy. You'll work the hardest, but let's get somebody who knows a little bit more. And that was the story I told myself for 25 years in business. Insane.
Yeah.
And
And
I
it's interesting
immediately
how
started to
people
tell
pick up
myself
on
different.
that and reflect that reality back to you. And when you change, you no longer have those experiences. And
then if I look at all those people
that way, people start looking, they realize that you have something valuable, like they see it. Like the reflection is extraordinary how quick that reflection is.
And then I laugh at myself, like, why would somebody who graduated from a state school, not a private school, went to a public high school, why would I attract and be surrounded by billionaires, millionaires? And I'm like, and I realized that, oh my God, like this is a reflection of me. Like this is who I should be. This is who I am. And like I never had a fight for their attention. Like I moved from New York to Arizona. Within a week, was working with a billionaire. Like did I know? I heard of him. Made a phone call. Like we met. We had a and like I constantly find myself in places with people that, based upon my path, I should not be. We don't eat the same restaurants. We don't play golf at the same country clubs. We didn't go to the same high school. We didn't go to the same college, right? There is no reason but the fact that they are a reflection of who I am, an aspect of me.
Yeah. If you think those things are permanent barriers to ever working or hanging out with somebody in that category, then there will be barriers. But if you don't see those barriers at all, they don't exist.
So and I know it's a simple example, right? But if you take that and you start to explore it out and expand it out, and that's what I was trying to do this weekend, because I was meeting all these different people there were people from all over the country with all different views, and just trying to say, okay, like theoretically, I know everybody here, right? We're all part of the same. We're all here for the reason. I'm here to help them. They're here to help me. I'm a part of them and they're a part of me, right? Theoretically. And as I'm meeting these hundreds of different people with all different views and different, and it's such an interesting way to go into an event, to go into a situation without trying to be, as I've been before, the loudest, the strongest, the most boastful, the guy with the opinion that everybody has to follow because I am right, versus I'm not right or wrong. Like, okay, well, why would now, I don't believe I should be wearing a mask, nor do I care. This guy's telling me I need to wear a mask. Okay, what about, why should, okay, I'm like, okay, I'll put one on. I'm like, okay, he's showing me my fears. He's showing me all the stuff that I must comply to get ahead in the world, that I must listen to everybody else, that I must follow rules. I must go through the process that society stands up for me to be accepted in society. And I'm like, oh, okay. That's why. Thank you for that.
Yeah. It's like he's come on and modeled fear and control for you. Like, let me do your little demonstration here. Like a 2-minute segment of a play. I will show you fear and control. Here's how it works. Remember that?
So you really want to laugh? So then 5 minutes later, we're at the bar. I bought him a drink. I said I was sorry. He's got his mask off. I have my mask off.
Oh, really?
We're talking. I'm just like, and then I'm going, how crazy is this?
That is. That's funny.
It's like, funny. Okay. It's okay. So I'm like I said, I would love to, honestly, and I'm going through, I just printed out this week's, I got back late last night from Santa Barbara in California. So like I said, I'm fascinated, very, very fascinated by this the oneness idea, the fact that, we're unlocking our vibration, our feeling, right? Our energy, our alignment is unlocking perspectives for us every second of every day. Like they already there. There's if it's like cartridges being loaded into, a machine. It's like, okay, what's you feel that way, clicking. Okay, here you go. And you're like, I would love to explore this a little bit more as I'm sort of just thinking about it. And this whole week, I'm going to test it. Very, and this is actually, COVID is the perfect time to test it because people are so opinionated and they're so angry.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is not really about COVID. I mean, to me, it's like what people call road rage. I mean, it doesn't really exist. It's people who are angry and fearful, and the road thing is purely a context in which they feel they can express that. They feel that permitted. Because there aren't too many places you can be that angry, but they feel it's justified somehow. Yeah.
You're well said, by the way. It's permitted. It's permissible in that situation. It's never permissible. We give ourselves, if you feel X, Y, or Z, right? You're permissible, or is permission to do, like, okay. But yeah, so I would love to, and even next week, and I'll send you some thoughts on.
We'll talk about this because more of the material is very rich. Yeah.
Holy cow.
Hey, I have a finishing up quote here from Wayne Dyer again, and Wayne Dyer talks about if you squeeze an orange, the only thing that can ever come out of an orange is orange juice, right? And so he basically says that if you have love or anger inside you, that's what will come out. And if you only have love inside you, then only love can ever come out. So whenever I hear about road rage, I think about, okay, that orange there has got love and hate and anger in there and fear, the whole lot. And you gave it a wee squeeze and all that stuff came out. And so the road is irrelevant, right? It's actually what's in the person.
That's great. You had a bunch of great quotes today. You're on fire with that stuff. I love it. That's great.
Yeah, I read Wayne Dyer very extensively. Well, I read one book in particular, Real Magic, about 30 years ago, 25 years ago, and I read it and read it and read it and read it, and I internalized, and I probably had some tapes or CDs or whatever that I listened to as well. And in fact, I had that book on a cassette
That's
as
funny.
well,
Yeah.
and I absorbed it, and that's why I remember so many of his quotes. But he had some great quotes. Yeah. Anyway, okay.
Thank you
That
very
was
much.
really
This was
good,
great.
and we'll talk again in a few days.
You got it, my friend. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
See you, Drew. Bye.